Hello, my name is Tim Shoebridge. Welcome to this video, the subject of which is the synth in front of me here. It's the Dreadbox Typhon. Now I've had this synth for about a month, so not a massive amount of time, but I've spent quite a few hours on it. I've created quite a few patches. I got to know it quite a bit. There's plenty of videos out there on YouTube already about it, showing you the basics of it, basic reviews of it. So I'm not going to go through all the features of it from start to finish at all in this video. What I'm going to do is just pick out a few things about it which I really think are quite amazing, if I'm honest, and talk about those. So that's what's coming up in this video. I really do hope you enjoy it. As always, thank you very, very much for watching. Now, the biggest standout feature for me, or set of features for me about the Typhon, is its modulation capabilities. The modulation capabilities are really quite deep, and there are some very advanced features in here as well, I have to say. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of this video talking about those modulation capabilities, and then we'll talk about the effects section afterwards. Now, the modulation capabilities, we're going to need to look at the screen an awful lot here. It's a small screen. There's a lot of information on it. It is very well laid out, I have to say. It's simple to use, but there's a lot of information here, and the text is very small, which is why I'm wearing my reading glasses. There's not that many synths that I have where I have to resort to using my glasses, but the Typhon is definitely one of them. Right, let's start with the simple modulation capabilities first, and that's the two envelope generators. They're very standard, but they do have a little twist to them, which is quite sort of like a Dreadbox thing, to add a little twist, a little quirk. So let's talk about those first of all. Now, there are two envelope generators, filter envelope and amplitude envelope, as you'd expect on a monosynth. You can access them through this button here, and then once we are looking at them in the screen, this button here on the right hand side toggles between which envelope generator we are looking at any point in time. So with the light off, we're looking at the filter envelope, and with the light on, we're looking at the amplitude envelope. Let's just fiddle around with the filter envelope and see what that sounds like. So I'm going to add a little bit of decay, a little bit of release, and to hear it we're going to have to turn down the cutoff. This control here on the left hand side is controlling the amount of the envelope applied to the filter. I think it's really great that we've got these three controls here on the left hand side: cutoff, resonance, and then the EG level. Okay, so nothing exciting about this envelope generator. However, we've got this control here called filter time, and this is a really cool thing that Dreadbox have added. What you can do is basically take your overall envelope, and you can either stretch it, expand it, or you can compress it by a factor. So here on the right hand side you'll see there's time, a little clock icon, and then it says, well, that's ×1. So this is a factor that's being applied to that whole envelope. It goes all the way up to 6 times, so stretched it out 6 times longer than it otherwise would be. And then the other way, divide by 10, so make it 1/10 of the size that it otherwise would be. This is a great performance tool, but it's also great for sound design. Great performance tool, but great for sound design because you can get the controls, the slopes, kind of how you want them, but then you can just very, very easily just change them all at the same time, make them all shorter, make them all longer. It's very, very nice to have this control. Very, very handy. I like the fact that it's there. So you've got standard envelope generators, but they've added a little twist and made them even more useful. So we've got this big one here for the filter time, and then we've got another one here for the amplitude time. Okay, so that's the envelopes covered. What about LFOs? Well, Dreadbox haven't given us LFOs, they've given us things called modulators. There's 3 of them in fact, and you can see them here on the screen if I scroll through them with this control here. M1, M2 and M3. Now modulators can be LFOs, they can be envelopes, they can be random value generators, and they can be step sequencers, and you can change their mode using this button here. So here modulator number 1 is currently an LFO, now it's an envelope, now it's a sample and hold circuit, a random value generator, and now it's a step sequencer. And we'll go through each of these ones in turn. So let's first look at the LFO capabilities of the modulators. You can see here we have a rate, that's the speed, a waveform, a fade control, destination and level. We'll come on to fade in a little while. Rate is as you expect it, it's the speed. Waveform, so we've got a variety of waveforms for our LFO, triangle, sawtooth, square, pulse. This is a weird waveform, it's kind of like a triangle with the top cut off, or a sort of sloping square wave. And then this one here, I don't know how to describe that at all. So there's some interesting waveforms in here. Let's just set it up and let's get it to modulate the filter. So we'll go in and change the destination. There are 13 destinations in total. Well, actually, let's go through them first of all. CV means the overall pitch of the synth. CV1 is accessing the pitch of just oscillator number 1. CV2 is the pitch of oscillator number 2, so it's great that you can get at those individually. Wave is modulating this wave shape control here in the middle. Cutoff frequency, resonance, EGL, that stands for envelope generator length. It's basically this control here, so you can lengthen or shorten the envelopes via a modulator. VCA is the overall volume, the overall gain. And then we've got 5 FX controls. FX1, that's filter frequency modulation. FX2, that's a delay parameter. And FX3. So we've got 5 FX parameters that we can also modulate. And it's lovely that they've done that, because so many times, even with like premium synths, it's almost like the effects section is a bolt-on section, sort of like, you know, as an afterthought. It's very rare that you'll find that synth manufacturers actually allow you to modulate the FX parameters via LFOs, envelopes or whatever, but Dreadbox have done it for us, which is really, really great. Right, so let's get on and modulate the cutoff frequency with this LFO, and I will point out to you a couple of features that I think are really great. So let's choose destination cutoff frequency. Let's turn down the cutoff a bit so we can hear the effect. There you go, as you'd expect, nothing exciting about that. This is the rate. Now the first feature, which I think is really very, very cool, it's really quite an advanced feature. It's this third control here called fade. So with a fade of 0, you just get a normal LFO. But if I go positive with this number, it can be negative as well, but if I go positive with this number, it will actually fade in the LFO. Not just delay, but fade in. So it's more complicated than just a delay. So let's set it to, say, 70. Here it gradually comes in. This is the maximum. That is an advanced feature. There are some, you know, premium synths that will have a delay on an LFO, but this one has a fade in. And the way you'd have to sort of like implement this on a regular synth would be to have an envelope generator that has a delay portion that then will then slowly, with a slow attack, will increase the amount of this LFO being applied to the cutoff. So you know, it would actually take up an envelope generator, a complex one that has a delay portion as well as the LFO itself. But here we have it just with one little control in this little synth. So that's fade in. If we go negative, we get fade out. So if I go right down to -100, this is the shortest fade out. In fact, it fades it out so fast, you just get no effect at all, no effect of the LFO. But if I move the slider up, so very small values, the fade out is much longer. So that's a really, really cool feature, this fade control. I think it's absolutely fantastic that it's there. It really is. It's quite an advanced feature. The other thing which I think is amazing about this modulator, it's not just for the LFO but whatever mode you're in, is the destinations. Now, I said before that there are 13 different destinations. What I didn't realise when I started playing around with the synth was that you can have multiple destinations, not just one. So here I've set the cutoff modulation to be 8, and then I thought, okay, I won't do that, I'll do CV instead to change the overall pitch. And what I realised is it's doing both modulations at the same time. So you can set any or all of these 13 destinations at the same time for your LFO or whatever mode it's in, and modulate them with different amounts, positive or negative. It's a very, very powerful modulation capability we've got here. 13 different destinations at the same time for each modulator times 3 modulators. The only downside of it really is that as you're flicking between them and looking at them, it's not immediately apparent what a modulator is modulating. You have to sort of like scroll through all the destinations and see if any of the levels are set, because if I set that to that, that to that, that to that, and then go down the bottom, you know, it looks like it's not modulating anything, but I have to go through and see if there are any values. There you are. That one, and that one. So that's a little bit of a downside, is with all of this power that's there, you have to be careful and check values, and there's no easy way of resetting them all down to zeros, unfortunately. Not that I'm aware of. You have to go and do it yourself. Let's just cover modulators in envelope generator mode. There's not a lot to say about them, to be honest with you. They're envelopes. There is one restriction, and the restriction is, and it's due to the number of controls that we have here, but the restriction is that the second control is both the decay amount and also the release amount. So you are restricted with modulators set up as envelopes that the decay portion and the release portion of the envelope are going to be the same. That's the only restriction. It's not a massive restriction because an awful lot of patches end up with both the decay and the release being the same, but it is there. Right, let's move on and look at the next mode, which is sample and hold, or sort of like it's a random value generator basically. So we have a rate, a speed at which it's going to be generating those random values. We'll come on to lag and probability in a minute, and then we've got our normal sort of destination and amount controls. So let's use this sample and hold circuit to change the pitch of the synth to random pitches, you know, that classic sound. So hold down a note. So one thing to point out at this time here is that if the destination is anything other than a pitch, then the level goes from plus 100 to minus 100. But when it's a pitch, like the CV, the overall pitch of the synth, or the individual pitches of the oscillators, CV1 and CV2, when it's those, then the value is maximum at 24 and minus 24, and that is semitones, so that when you set it to 24 you'll get whole semitone steps basically. So this is what we're getting right now. Whereas anything lower than that in value won't get us whole semitones. So what is lag? Well, lag is a smoothing algorithm. So rather than each of those random values being jumped to immediately, it's like a slew control. We are slowly drifting from one value to the next. So let's slow it down a bit, and then I'll increase the lag. Crazy. Now, the only other synth that I've seen a lag on in recent times, in recent memory, is actually the Moog 1, and that's a pretty advanced synthesizer in many, many ways. So I think it's really cool that we've got a lag feature here on the Typhon. For such a small, cheap little synthesizer, it has some pretty advanced features in it. And probability, another advanced feature. So if it's going to generate a random value, there's a probability assigned to it. So probability of 100 means it's absolutely highly probable it's definitely going to generate a random value. And that probability goes all the way down to 0. So obviously at 0, it never ever generates a random value at all. And obviously you've got everywhere in between. Let's take the lag off. Set it to 50. And now it's a 50-50 chance that it'll actually generate a value or not. So I'm playing this with it changing the pitch because it's very obvious to hear exactly what it's doing, but the best use of this sample and hold circuit is to modulate some of the other parameters, the FX parameters or the cutoff or the resonator. I've got a patch here where I am randomly modulating the resonance of the filter. And it sounds like this. So that little sort of whale song that's going on there is the modulation of the resonance in this sort of random way with a 75% probability and lag, so that the values are smoothed. Right, so the next mode of the modulator is my favourite. I think it's the most powerful, and it's very rare to see it in a synthesizer, and that is this step sequencer. So a modulator can be a step sequencer. The speed with which that step sequencer is working is controlled by the tempo of the main sequencer. So you can see here we've got 240 beats per minute. So it's in time synchronized with the main sequencer. There's a number of steps. That first parameter here with that hash sign means number of steps. It can go all the way from 1 up to 32, so that's quite a lot actually for a little step sequencer. Let's set it back to where it was, which is 8. The next two parameters, this one is selecting which step you want to set a level for, so it's going from 1 to 8. We'll see as soon as we move it up to 32, it's now going to go from 1 up to 32, so we're selecting the step that we want to set a level for, and then the third control is setting the level. Okay, so it's very, very simple to do. Let's leave it back at 8. So all I've got here is a little 8-step sequence where I'm setting the level 50, 0, 50, 70, 50, 0, 50, 21. So these values are actually going to be used to modulate the CV. So the destination here is CV. I haven't set the value yet. We'll set it to 24, and then this is what it sounds like. If I set the step down to say 4, we're only going to hear half of that and then repeated. Let's go down to 3. So you can hear it in action. Obviously you don't need to be modulating the pitch. You could be modulating anything you like with these steps. But the fact that you can modulate the pitch and you can actually modulate the pitch of each of the oscillators independently, well, that got me thinking. So I'm going to load now a patch that I've set up. This particular patch is using 2 modulators. Modulator number 1 is, if I scroll through the list of destinations, it's modulating CV1, and modulator number 2 is modulating CV number 2. So they're both 8-step sequences, but they're choosing different values for each of the oscillators. So when I play a note, it's playing the synth duophonically, effectively. So what if I were to set the number of steps for, say, this second one to be, I don't know, 5? Let's go with 5. It sounds quite similar, but it isn't the same. The values are different for that second modulator. And you're getting a kind of, a polyrhythm effect by setting the steps, the lengths to different lengths. So I can have modulator 1 modulate one oscillator, modulator 2 modulate the second oscillator, but then I've got the step sequencer of the synth itself, and I can combine all 3 of those at the same time to come up with something a bit more crazy. So I'm going to go back to my first patch that I had with just one modulator working. This one. This is the one I had before. So we can hear what the sequencer is doing to this. That's the modulator. I'll turn the modulation off. And then I'll play the sequencer on its own. And when we add both of those together, we get something completely new. So I was originally thinking in this video of going through the different effects and talking you through those. I'm not going to do that because I think this video is already getting a bit longer than I was hoping it would. There are some really cool distortion effects. There's some interesting sort of modulation effects like flanges and stuff like that, and there's also reverbs and delays. And I think that the Typhon really is capable of a huge spectrum of sounds. You know, you can do really grungy, gritty, hard, dirty sounds with the distortion effects turned up, but then you've got these huge cavernous kind of reverbs with delays built in, so you can create some gorgeous sort of ambient textures and ambient sounds at the same time. So you've got, you know, both ends of the spectrum with this one little synthesizer. The thing that I will say about it, you know, the thing that kind of hit me when I first plugged it in, switched it on and just went through some of the presets is that the presets kind of, you know, that they're all fairly grungy, dirty, gritty kind of presets. That might be your thing, it might not be your thing. It's not really my thing. I'm much more into sort of like smoother, more ambient sounds. So if those presets aren't ones that grab you, then, you know, just think beyond those and you know, start making your own. To be honest with you, it's really simple with the controls you've got on the front panel here. You don't have to go into the modulators and step sequences and stuff like that if you don't want to. It's all very straightforward on the front panel to get you started. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, and it is worth mentioning, is the fact that the synthesizer is USB powered. It doesn't take a lot of power through USB, which means it's actually completely portable. You can plug a little power bank into it, for example, USB power bank, and play it anywhere. And the fact that it's got a sequencer on board, as well as these other step sequencers, means that you can actually, you know, sort of like program it and get sounds out of it without actually hooking it up to a keyboard. So it's completely standalone from that point of view, and I think that's a really cool thing. However, because it's USB powered, like all USB interfaced synthesizers, there is a potential issue that you might get, and that's with ground loops. So, you know, my immediate sort of like temptation with the Typhon is to connect the USB cable up to my computer. So in terms of connectivity, I've got my audio outputs going into my digital I/O interface, then into my computer, and then I've got a USB cable going into my computer. And my computer is providing USB power, which is great, but it's also acting as a MIDI interface, which is also very cool as well. However, in that scenario, I've got a ground loop issue, and the reason I've got a ground loop issue is because my digital interface is then connected to my computer, not by USB in this case, by FireWire. But if it was USB or FireWire, it doesn't make any difference. You've got this potential for a ground loop scenario. So I'm going to play you now the difference between using a USB cable that's connected to my computer and this USB cable, which is what I've been using here for this video, which is just going straight to a power outlet, a mains outlet via a little USB interface. So there's a difference in the sound that you'll hear, hopefully you'll hear, even with YouTube compression, you'll hear the difference that you get in the sound. This is with mains power. And that is with computer power. I'm not going to turn it up, amplify it or anything. That's just what you get. That big loop, that's my computer recognizing the MIDI device. So there's a definite ground loop issue there, and as you go through the screens you'll hear little buzzes and sounds because of the refresh rate of the screens. It is an issue. It's an issue with many synthesizers. I mean, I've got some much more premium and more expensive synths than this, and I've got ground loop issues when I connect those things up via USB to my computer because they have MIDI over USB. And the way to mitigate this is to have balanced outputs on the synth so that I can use balanced cables and I will break that ground loop. And this doesn't have balanced outputs. It's not a premium synthesizer. It's very low in price, very competitively priced indeed. So they haven't put balanced outputs in it, but I think that it really is something you need to think about and look out for. I don't use MIDI over USB with the Typhon. I use a good old-fashioned MIDI DIN, and thankfully they provided MIDI DIN sockets on the back of the Typhon. So that's my way of getting around the ground loop issue. But it's not a specific Typhon issue or Dreadbox issue. It's an issue with many synths. As I said, I've got some rather expensive synthesizers that don't give me balanced outputs, and I can't use the USB connectivity because of ground loops. Next thing I want to cover with the Typhon is its external audio input. It's got a little mini jack mono coming into it, so it's accepting external audio, which allows you to then use the Typhon as an external audio FX processor. So what I've got for this little demo is I've got the Dreadbox Abyss here. If you don't know what that is, it's a Dreadbox's 4-note polyphonic synth. I don't think they make it anymore, but they made it a couple of years ago. I've got that coming through to the Typhon through the external audio input, and then you're hearing the output from the Typhon. So when I play some notes, you're hearing the Abyss. So I'm playing it probably polyphonically. So then what I can do is I can go to the effects. Let's add some reverb, for example. Or let's add a bit of chorus. And of course we could add some distortion. But the interesting thing is that this external audio, in terms of the signal path in the Typhon, it doesn't come in just before the effects section, which is what I would have expected. It actually comes in before the filter section, and that means that I can use the Typhon's filter to control the sound from the Abyss. Which means I could modulate the filter. So let's do that. Let's go to a modulator. We'll use an LFO, destination cutoff, and let's modulate it. So because the audio is coming in before the filter and then it's travelling through to the amp and then through to the effects, there is a small issue here, and the issue is that by default, unless I play a note and the Typhon receives that note, it won't open up its amplitude envelope and I won't hear anything. And I'll show you how that works. If I pull this MIDI cable out, which is what I'm currently using, and now I play, you get nothing. I'm still playing to the Abyss, but the Typhon isn't receiving any MIDI ons, and I don't hear anything. So you can't just plug an external effect, an external audio into the back and then just expect to be able to use the effects. You've got to do something. Now, I looked through the manual and I couldn't find an answer to this. And I went through all the menu options and I couldn't find an answer to it. Maybe I've just missed it. But what I ended up having to do, just to get this to work without using MIDI, was to go to the sequencer and just create a one-step sequence with a tie. So it's just constantly going to be, once you press play on the sequencer, it's just going to play a note constantly. And if I press play now, it's gated and I can hear the audio coming through. The synth is actually playing one single note, but you can't hear it because what you can do is in the menu system here on the last page, the settings page, there is a VCO control here, and this controls the volume of basically this wave knob of both oscillators blended together. If I turn it up, you'll hear that that's the note that the sequencer is constantly playing. But thankfully I can turn that down so you don't have to hear it, and that's my way around getting the Typhon to play external audio. But the better way, the way that I prefer, is to use MIDI. So let me plug this back in. So where this MIDI cable is coming from, my MIDI controller keyboard is actually going straight into the Abyss, and then from the Abyss has got a through MIDI socket. So then I'm daisy chaining the MIDI out of the Abyss and into the Typhon. So both synths are receiving almost identically at the same time my MIDI on, note ons and note offs. So just, that's my way of getting the Typhon to trigger, opening up the audio for me so I can play it. And that does mean that because I'm triggering the envelopes in the Typhon as well as triggering the Abyss, it means that I can actually use the envelopes paraphonically, if you know what I mean. So if I turn up the filter envelope, we're hearing the Typhon's filter there, because if I turn it right down, obviously it's being triggered with each note, and it's monophonic. But if I play some keys up here so you can see, you will see that I'm playing it paraphonically. So each time I hold down a note, this envelope is getting re-triggered. So although it's a bit of a drawback, you can't just plug your external audio in and just expect to use it as an effects processor. You've got to do something. The flip side of that is that the audio is coming in before the filter, which means you can modulate the filter, and it also means you can take use of the envelopes as well if you want to. One final thing I want to sort of like mention regarding the user interface of the synthesizer. Yes, you've got this section here, very Dreadbox style, nice controls, really feels solid. But then you've got this section over here, which is the sort of like the interface to the the parameters and the menus and stuff like that. It's not the same experience as using a Moog or a Dave Smith or a Novation synth, for example. It's not got that kind of slick feel to it. It feels a little bit more kind of, I don't know, raw, how you're using the buttons and the screen. It reminds me quite a lot of the MFB Synth Pro that I've been playing around with the last few weeks. It's got that kind of feel to it. It's just a little bit rough around the edges. It's difficult for me to explain. I mean, this controller here, for example, yeah, it's a little bit wobbly, but it's got a very cheap feel to it, and a sort of cheap clacky click to it. It's a cheap synth, right? They've kept the cost down, absolutely. But this is probably the most annoying thing for me on this synth. Is this control here. I'm not saying that it's going to break or it's about to give up or whatever it is. It's obviously the only rotary encoder. Everything else here these are potentiometers. But it is a bit of a cheap feel. I'm not enamored by it, shall I say that? But I understand that they've kept the cost down. But the menu system itself, the way you interact with it, it's not a deep menu, it's a very, very light menu. We've got these different pages here, and then we've got another menu system inside here. It's just a little bit quirky, a little bit clunky, a little bit sort of it's basic. Let's say it's basic. That's just something to bear in mind if you're interested in getting this synth. But it shouldn't put you off. It should definitely not put you off. The few things about the Typhon that really, for me, make it an incredibly good synthesizer. First, of course, is the sound. The Dreadbox oscillators, a gorgeous sounding filter. It really sounds big and beefy, like an analog synth should sound. Unfortunately, an awful lot of modern synths these days, they might have analog written on them, but they don't sound particularly analog. This sounds analog. It sounds like you are playing a vintage analog synth. So the sound is amazing and fantastic. And then when you want to get into it, the modulation capability, as I've said, is really advanced and very, very cool. And then you've got the digital effects. It's great with an analog synth to have some decent digital effects and stereo output. It's nice to see more and more synth manufacturers, taking more care over the choice of effects. And obviously with the Typhon, they've gone to the next level. They've allowed you to actually modulate the effects parameters, or at least some of them, which is really, really cool. So all of these features, and the fact that you've got this wide spectrum of sounds you can get out of the Typhon, and the fact that it is actually portable, you can take it anywhere, and you've got these step sequences inside it, and play it duophonically if you want to. All these things add up to me to an incredibly good value for money synthesizer. I think this is a fantastic little thing. And I would highly recommend you taking a look at it. It's a lovely, lovely sounding synth. It's got a huge amount of potential, and it's incredibly cheap for what you're getting. I mean, when I first heard about it, it was being announced. My initial impression was, without sort of like thinking about it too deeply, is, oh, it's another mono synth. I don't need another mono synth. I've got so many of them. What does it give me? Oh, it's got some digital effects, that's nice. Oh, and it's got presets, you can save presets, that's nice. But do I need it? I don't think so. But actually now I've got it in front of me and I've been playing with it. It's so much fun. And the possibilities in terms of sounds you can get out of it are really, really big.